I was halfway through a lazy Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight cuts through the blinds just right, making everything feel a bit too warm and slow. I had my laptop open, drafting the kind of emails that make you wonder why you ever got into business in the first place, when my phone buzzed against the wooden desk. A voicemail from my father. We weren't exactly close, not in the way that most people imagine fathers and sons should be. Ours was a relationship built on obligation business and a thin layer of civility that had only gotten thinner over the years. I hit play more out of habit than curiosity. "Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties." I froze. The words hung in the air, sharp and final, each syllable a small, precise blade. I played it again just to be sure I hadn't misheard. "Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties." My thumb hovered over the screen as the message ended, the tiny speaker crackling like a dying fire. That was it. No preamble, no justification, not even the strained sigh of a man regretting his decision. Just a clean surgical cut. I set my phone down and stared at the screen. My mind buzzed not with anger, but with a deep, slow, spreading numbness. I'd expected a rough reunion, sure. Family gatherings with us were less about hugs and shared memories, more about veiled barbs and passive-aggressive toasts. But to be cut off entirely, that was new. I glanced at the corner of my desk where the thick, leather-bound ledger sat. The one that had held the promise of our family business for decades. My name written in clean, deliberate ink beside my parents' signatures had once symbolized something solid, something permanent. Now it felt like a trap. Without a second thought, I reached over, pulled the ledger closer, and flipped to the page where my name sat like a carefully laid snare. I grabbed a pen and with a slow, deliberate stroke, crossed it out. The sound of the ink scratching against the paper felt like a door slamming shut. I closed the book, the heavy cover thudding like the final note in a long, dissonant song. That night, I called my lawyer. A calm, precise man with a voice like sandpaper over polished wood. I told him to draw up the paperwork to remove my name from every financial tie I had to my parents. If they wanted to sever ties, I'd make sure they felt the sting. The next morning, I canceled my flight, erased the reunion date from my calendar, and fired off a brief, emotionless email to my parents. I requested a full financial audit of the business and confirmed my intention to withdraw from any shared ventures. No pleasantries, no attempts at reconciliation, just the cold, clear language of a man severing a contract. 48 hours later, my phone exploded with notifications. 78 missed calls from my mother, a dozen frantic texts from my sister, and a string of increasingly desperate emails from my father's accountant. I could almost picture his thin, nervous frame pacing the cluttered office glasses, slipping down his nose as he muttered numbers under his breath. For a moment, I hesitated. It would have been so easy to answer, to give them the comfort of a voice they'd taken for granted for so long. But instead, I leaned back in my chair, let the phone buzz its way into silence, and felt a small, bitter smile creep onto my lips. They wanted a clean break. I'd give them one. I wasn't just walking away. I was burning the bridge behind me. A few days passed and I thought I'd heard the last of it. The silence felt strange, like the uneasy calm before a storm, but I wasn't about to back down. My phone still buzzed occasionally. More missed calls, frantic emails, a couple of voicemails from my mother, each one sounding a little more desperate than the last. Then late one night, I got a message from my sister Chloe. "Hey, we need to talk. Call me when you get a minute. It's about Mom and Dad." I ignored it at first, letting the message sit unopened as I scrolled through my work emails. But a small part of me, the part that still remembered teaching her to ride a bike, her tiny hands clutching the handlebars as I jogged beside her, made me tap the call button. She picked up on the first ring. "Jake, what's going on?" Her voice was sharp, tinged with an edge of worry I hadn't heard in years. "What do you mean?" I kept my tone cool, leaning back in my chair. "Mom's been a mess, crying every night. Dad's locked himself in his office for days. He even canceled a meeting with the bank. What happened? Did you quit the business or something?" I let out a slow breath, the kind you take before stepping into a fight you know you can't avoid. "Yeah, I did. I pulled my name from the family business, completely." The line went quiet for a long, uncomfortable second. I could almost picture her, one hand tangled in her hair, the other gripping the phone, struggling to process my words. Why would you do that? You know how much they've invested in this. You're throwing away decades of work, Jake. I almost laughed. Invested. The only thing they ever invested in was control, making sure every decision, every cent, every bit of leverage was firmly in their hands. Because they made it clear I'm not part of the family anymore, I said, letting the words settle like cold stones. Dad called me, left a voicemail telling me not to bother coming to the reunion. Said we're cutting ties, so I'm just making it official. Chloe exhaled sharply, the sound crackling through the line. That doesn't make any sense. He wouldn't just do that. Well, he did, and I'm done pretending like I owe them anything. There was a long, strained pause, the kind that only comes when the truth finally cuts through years of family lies. Jake, just call him. Talk to him. You know he says things without thinking. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling the beginnings of a headache creep in. I wanted to tell her everything, about the years of resentment, the missed birthdays, the constant reminders that I was a disappointment. But I didn't. I couldn't. Maybe, I said, my voice flat, but I'm not the one who cut ties. He did. Before she could argue, I ended the call, tossing my phone onto the desk. My heart was pounding, a slow, angry rhythm that echoed through my chest. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence wash over me. This wasn't just about business. This was about freedom. About finally walking away from a life where every decision, every move, every damn breath had to pass through their approval. I wasn't just burning bridges. I was burning the whole damn empire. I woke up the next morning to a string of missed calls and voicemails, most of them from my mother. I didn't bother listening. I already knew the script. The guilt, the pleading, the half-apologies wrapped in self-righteousness. Instead, I made a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window watching the city slowly come to life. But then a message from my father's accountant caught my eye. The subject line alone, urgent business account review, was enough to make my stomach tighten. I opened it. Jake, we need to discuss the recent account changes. It appears your name has been removed from several key financial documents without your authorization. This has caused a significant disruption in the company's financial structure. Please call me as soon as possible. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. So they hadn't expected me to walk away. They thought they had me locked in financially and emotionally. Typical. I took a deep breath, set my coffee down, and fired off a quick reply. Don't worry about it. I authorized the changes myself. If they have a problem, they can reach out directly. I hit send, leaned back, and let a small, satisfied smile creep onto my face. The first domino had just fallen. A few hours later, my sister called again. I ignored it. Then came another text, this one a bit more frantic. Jake, what did you do? Dad's freaking out. Just call me. I set my phone down without replying. They wanted to cut me out, fine. I'd let them see what life was like without the one son who had kept their precious family business afloat all these years. By midday, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Her voicemail, a mix of muffled sobs and broken sentences, filled the room as I played it over my Bluetooth speaker. Jake, please, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Your father is... He's not himself. He says you've pulled out of the business entirely. He's been on the phone with the bank all morning trying to reverse the paperwork. Please, Jake, just talk to us. I let the message play out, her voice cracking with every word, then deleted it without a second thought. I'd given them the courtesy of a clean break, and now they wanted to claw their way back in. Around 3 p.m., just as I was starting to think the storm might pass, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. I glanced at the sender, the bank. Subject: immediate financial review required. I opened it. Dear Mr. Thompson, we have received multiple conflicting requests regarding the status of your family's business accounts. Given the recent changes, we have initiated a temporary hold on all outgoing transactions to prevent unauthorized access. Please contact us to confirm your intentions. I couldn't help but chuckle. My father, ever the control freak, was already scrambling to undo the damage. He hadn't even considered the possibility that I might actually walk away, that I might want to. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the rich, bitter aroma filling my small apartment, and started drafting my next move. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. The next morning, I drove down to the bank, my lawyer in tow. We walked into the glass-walled office, the air-conditioned chill biting at my skin as I shook hands with the branch manager. "Mr. Thompson, it's good to see you. We've been trying to reach you." I forced a polite smile. I figured, let's get this straightened out. An hour later, the paperwork was signed, the accounts frozen, and my father's desperate attempts to wrest back control officially blocked. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in years, the sun cutting through the morning haze as I made my way back to my car. My phone buzzed again as I slid into the driver's seat. Another call from Chloe. I hesitated for a moment, then hit the ignore button. I had no time for family guilt trips today. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, a faint, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of my lips. The first domino had fallen, and there was no stopping the chain reaction now. A few days later, I found myself sitting at my kitchen counter scrolling through my phone when another email from the bank popped up. I took a slow sip of my coffee before opening it, already expecting another desperate attempt by my father to undo the damage. Subject: fraud investigation notification. That caught my attention. I opened it, eyes scanning the crisp clinical text. "Dear Mr. Thompson, as part of our ongoing financial review, we have identified several irregular transactions involving accounts associated with the Thompson family business. Given the potential for financial misconduct, we have initiated a full audit of all related accounts. Please be advised that all funds will remain frozen until the investigation is complete." I let out a low whistle, leaning back in my chair. So it had finally happened. My father, in his desperation to cut me out, had tripped over his own shoelaces, exposing the tangled mess he'd been trying to hide for years. For a moment, I felt a pang of something. Not quite guilt, but a flicker of regret for what this would mean for my mother and Chloe. But I shook it off. They had made their choices, just like I had. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. I let it ring, watched the little avatar of his stiff, disapproving face flicker on the screen before the call cut off. Then a voicemail. I hit play, putting it on speaker as I continued flipping through the morning paper. "Jake, what the hell have you done?" His voice was tight, strained, the kind of tone I hadn't heard since he caught me sneaking out of the house as a teenager. "You froze the accounts. Do you have any idea what you've done? This is bigger than you realize. Call me back, now." I chuckled, the sound echoing off the kitchen walls. Bigger than I realize. That was the problem with him. He always assumed I was still the naive kid who needed his approval. The boy who used to stay up late practicing his sales pitch just to hear a single word of praise. I grabbed my laptop and opened the folder I'd labeled Family Fallout. A neat collection of emails, financial statements, and correspondence I had quietly copied over the years. I spent the next few hours sifting through the data, looking for every crack, every hidden lie he had tried to cover with slick words and creative accounting. I found more than I expected. Shadow accounts, hidden debts, and enough questionable transactions to make a tax auditor break into a cold sweat. My father had been moving money around like a magician, with a sleight-of-hand trick, shuffling funds from one shell company to another, masking losses, inflating assets, and avoiding taxes with the kind of precision that only years of practice could hone. I leaned back, staring at the numbers swimming across my screen, and felt a slow, cold satisfaction settle in my chest. He had cut me out, and now he was about to pay the price. The next morning, I called my lawyer, laying out everything I'd found. He listened without interrupting the line, crackling with quiet intensity as I outlined the labyrinth of financial deceit my father had been weaving for years. "Send me everything," he said, his voice sharp. "This is more than just a family dispute, Jake. This could lead to criminal charges." "Good," I replied, my fingers tightening around the phone. "I want every rock overturned. If he thought he could cut me out and walk away clean, he's about to learn just how wrong he was." That afternoon, I drafted a formal complaint to the IRS attaching every damning piece of evidence I had gathered. I wasn't just burning the bridge. I was setting fire to the whole foundation. By the time I hit send, the sun had dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across my apartment. I poured myself a drink, leaned against the balcony railing, and watched as the city below flickered to life in the gathering dark. I had just declared war, and there was no turning back. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and hurried meetings. My lawyer was moving faster than I expected, his emails coming in at odd hours, each one loaded with legal jargon and carefully worded warnings. The bank had confirmed the audit, and the IRS had acknowledged receipt of my complaint. The gears were grinding into motion, and my father had just realized he was stuck in the machine. Then, just as I was sitting down for a late breakfast, my phone rang again. "Chloe." I hesitated, my fork hovering over my scrambled eggs, then finally picked up. "Jake," she said, her voice tight. "You have to stop this." "Stop what?" I replied, feigning ignorance as I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Don't play dumb," she snapped, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Mom's been a wreck. Dad's talking about lawyers' lawsuits and God knows what else. He's convinced you're trying to destroy him." I set my cup down, the ceramic clinking against the glass tabletop. "I'm not trying to destroy him, Chloe. I'm just making sure he can't destroy me." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I could almost picture her pacing the tiny apartment she shared with her fiancé, her mind racing to find a way to bridge the growing chasm between us. "Jake," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Please just talk to him. This is getting out of control. Whatever he did, whatever this is about, we can fix it. Just don't burn everything down." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the gray, rain-soaked city outside my window. "Chloe, this isn't just about a few harsh words or a stupid voicemail. He tried to cut me out, not just from the family, but from the business, the life I helped build. And when I called him on it, he doubled down. He tried to erase me." She didn't respond right away, the line crackling with the faint hiss of her unsteady breath. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'm just asking you not to burn the whole family to the ground. Please." I closed my eyes, rubbing the bridge of my nose as a familiar ache settled behind my eyes. She was the only one who had ever really tried to understand me. The only one who had defended me when the rest of the family turned cold and distant. "I can't do that," I said quietly, my tone firm but tinged with a sadness I hadn't expected. "I've already made my choice." I ended the call before she could argue, tossing my phone onto the couch as I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I received a surprise visit from my father's accountant. I had barely taken a sip of my morning coffee when the intercom buzzed, his nervous, stammering voice crackling through the small speaker. "Jake, please, can we talk? It's important." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the button, then finally buzzed him in. A few minutes later, he stepped into my apartment, his suit rumpled, dark circles etched beneath his eyes. "Sit," I said, motioning to the couch. He sat down heavily, his hands fumbling with the thin leather portfolio clutched to his chest. "Jake, listen," he said, his voice a hurried whisper. "Your father, he's in deep, deeper than you know. If this audit goes through, it's not just his business at risk, it's his freedom." I arched an eyebrow, leaning against the kitchen counter as I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "He's been hiding money for years. Offshore accounts, shell companies, tax evasion. I tried to warn him, told him to clean up the books, but he wouldn't listen. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, the pieces clicking into place. My father, always the master of appearances, had built his empire on a foundation of lies, and now it was all starting to crumble. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice flat. He looked down, his fingers trembling, as he pulled a small flash drive from the pocket of his jacket. "Because I don't want to go down with him. I have a family too. If this comes out, it'll ruin me." I took the drive, weighing it in my hand as I stared down at the broken, desperate man sitting in front of me. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it passed quickly, replaced by a slow rising anger. "Get out," I said, my tone sharp. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his portfolio like a lifeline as he stumbled out the door, his hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. I closed the door behind him, the small drive still clutched in my hand, and let out a long, slow breath. I had just been handed the final piece of the puzzle, the evidence I needed to bring my father's entire empire crashing down. I crossed the room, plugged the drive into my laptop, and watched as the files loaded onto the screen. Years of hidden transactions, falsified tax returns, and financial shell games laid bare in cold, unflinching black and white. I leaned back, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across my face as the first drops of rain splattered against the windows, tracing thin, jagged lines down the glass. The trap had just snapped shut, and there was no way he could wriggle out of this one. The morning after the accountant's visit, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating angrily against the glass of my nightstand. I reached over, squinting at the screen. Another voicemail from my father, his name flashing in sharp white letters. I hit play, his voice crackling through the speaker, thick with anger and barely contained desperation. "Jake, I know what you're doing. I don't know where you got those files, but you need to stop this. You have no idea what kind of damage you're causing. This isn't just about the business. You're tearing this family apart. Call me back, now." I set the phone down, leaning back against the headboard, a small, bitter smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Tearing the family apart. That line might have stung a few months ago, but now it felt hollow, a desperate attempt to claw back control. After a long, hot shower, I settled into my desk chair, the flash drive still plugged into my laptop, the files glowing on the screen like the pulsing heartbeat of a dying empire. I flipped through the spreadsheets, each one a carefully constructed web of deceit. Offshore transfers, shell companies, fake invoices. Every piece a testament to my father's relentless drive to bend the rules in his favor. I spent the next few hours sorting through the data, compiling a neat, damning dossier that outlined every shady transaction, every hidden account, every tax dodge he had tried to bury over the years. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, the city outside my window shimmering in the cool blue of early evening. I attached the files to an email, addressed it to my lawyer, and added a single line before hitting send. "Let's end this." I sat back, my heart racing, the tension in my shoulders slowly unwinding as the message disappeared into the digital ether. I had crossed the final line, set the last piece in motion, and now all that was left to do was wait. The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I woke to a news alert on my phone. Prominent business owner under federal investigation for tax fraud. I clicked the link, my pulse quickening as I skimmed the article. My father's name was there, buried in the third paragraph alongside words like embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. I felt a strange, hollow satisfaction as I scrolled through the details, the cold, clinical language painting a picture of a man I barely recognized. A man who had built his empire on lies and deceit, who had used his family as pawns in his endless game of financial chess. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Chloe. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, then finally answered. "Jake," she said, her voice a trembling whisper. "What have you done?" "I did what I had to do," I replied, my tone calm, almost detached. "They're saying he could go to prison," she said, her breath hitching. "Mom's in pieces. She hasn't left the house in days. Dad's locked himself in his office. This is destroying them." I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch out between us, the weight of her words settling like a stone in my chest. "Chloe, they tried to cut me out. They tried to erase me. I'm just making sure they can't do it to anyone else." She didn't respond, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, the sound of her tears crackling through the phone. "Jake, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this, please." I let out a long, slow breath, my fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't my fault, that I had only pulled the first thread, that the rest of this unraveling was their doing. But I didn't. Instead, I ended the call, tossing my phone onto the desk as I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. The next morning, the official charges were filed. I watched the live stream from my laptop as federal agents raided my father's office, the harsh fluorescent light casting sharp, angular shadows against the polished floors. My mother's frantic cries echoed through the small speakers. Her figure a pale, trembling blur as she clutched at my father's arm. Her face twisted in a mask of disbelief and betrayal. I closed the laptop, leaning back in my chair as the final echoes of their downfall faded into the silence of my apartment. I had done it. I had burned the bridge, cut the cord, and severed the final fraying ties that had bound me to their twisted, self-serving world. A few days later, I received a final text from Chloe. A single line, the words raw and jagged like a wound still bleeding. "You destroyed us." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the reply button, then slowly set the phone down. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. As the weeks passed, I settled into a new rhythm, the weight of my family's betrayal slowly lifting, replaced by a strange, bittersweet sense of freedom. I had lost everything, and gained something far more valuable in the process. I had reclaimed my life. Story 2. "We're just inviting you out of sympathy, so don't stay long," my mother remarked. I simply took a sip of my drink, smiled, and walked away in silence. They learned 2 weeks later that I had sold the family cottage they all relied on for their summer getaways. After then, the bank statements began to come in. They closed their joint accounts. A letter from a lawyer was on its way, and the property taxes were still overdue. You're simply being invited out of sympathy, thus avoid staying too long. As I put down my glass, the words struck me. My mother's voice resonating sharply and casually over the sound of clinking glasses and courteous laughing. I thought for a moment that I had misheard her, but maybe her words were distorted by the music and the monotonous din of chatter. I realized I had heard correctly when my sister's chuckle came out, a harsh, rapid sound, like to a judge's gavel. My mother leaned closer, her diamond bracelet gleaming in the chandelier light as her immaculately manicured hand rested on the back of my sister's chair. As if she had just swatted away a bothersome fly, she was already turning back to the group and ignoring me. My brother's wife let out a sigh at me. She usually gave me that arrogant, sidelong glance as if assessing me and determining that I was missing my brother. With his watch glowing in the low light, he smiled, took another sip of his pricey scotch, and flung his arm possessively over her shoulder. All of them were complicit. All of them. I simply grinned and allowed the warmth to slide down my throat as I took a slow, thoughtful drink of my whiskey. I chose not to respond. What was the purpose? All my life, I had heard those small jabs. Beneath their well-planned small conversation, I saw the disdain seething. When I believed I could get their respect, or at least their acceptance, it used to annoy me. But long ago, the ship had set sail. Placing my glass on the gleaming mahogany bar, I looked around the room. The house looked just as I recalled it, with well-chosen artwork and elegant furnishings. My parents' meticulously maintained image is reflected in every nook and crevice. It seemed like a museum I had accidentally strolled into, yet it had once felt like home. Silently, I slipped out the side door and into the chilly night air. The sound of my footfall reverberated off the driveway's stone pathway. In my pocket, I could feel my phone buzzing. It was most likely a last-minute reminder about a cousin's birthday or another group text from my sister. I ignored it and gripped the chilly leather of the steering wheel as I slipped into my automobile. The resentment of my mother's remarks turned into a sluggish, seething rage as I drove away. However, behind that came another element, a sort of clarity. They believed that I was the family's failure and the black sheep. All right, if they wanted me to, but on my terms, I would play that part. They might dismiss me with a tight, condescending smirk and a sneer, but I was sick of being the object of their jokes and the afterthought at every family get-together. A strategy had started to take shape by the time I turned into my apartment's driveway. Something sluggish and careful at the back of my thoughts. One thread at a time, their meticulously planned lives would be shattered by this type of lengthy game. I gave my lawyer Dan a call early the next morning. He owed me a favor, but it was early. He responded in a drowsy, somewhat irritated voice, and I knew he'd be ready for the type of silent, brutal job I had in mind after we concluded the difficult real estate deal a few years ago. I simply grinned. Dan, hello. Do you recall the family dollar that my parents had placed in my name years prior? I believe it's time for some adjustments. I wasted no time at all. I woke up with a headache the morning after the party. It wasn't the whiskey, though. It was the echo of my mother's remarks, my siblings' smug laughing, and their tight, patronizing smiles that seemed to indicate that they understood me completely. I feel sorry. They felt that way about me. They were hauling me about to cheer themselves up as if I were some family charity case. After getting out of bed, I sat down at my kitchen table and sprayed some cold water on my face. Its little scuffed surface was covered in an old coffee ring and yesterday's trash mail. I never bothered to remove it. I began creating a list after grabbing a notepad and a pen, the same ones I used to jot down notes on freelancing work. Not a tirade. No illusion of juvenile retaliation. I had moved on from that. There was a plan, long delayed, cold, and calculating. The dacha is sold by the first thing I put in large angular letters. It had nearly slipped my mind. My grandparents bequeathed me the family dacha, a comfortable 2-story cottage on a lake around 2 hours outside of town. I had many childhood memories of it, including fishing excursions with my grandpa and campfires that burned brightly into the night. The burnt marshmallows' sweet, smoky flavor. But years ago, my parents had discreetly taken over using it as a venue for extended weekends with friends and family cookouts, as well as their own little summer hideaway. I was seldom ever invited, though. In the same way that they made fun of me in their family jokes, they used it carelessly. But because of a misguided feeling of familial duty, I had mostly overlooked the fact that the title was in my name. I located the number of my attorney, Dan, and dialed. On the third ring, he answered, sounding sleepy and scratchy as though I had just roused him from a heavy slumber. "What's happening, Tom?" Not even 8 a.m. has arrived. I reclined in my chair and gazed at the gray light coming in through the thin slats of my flat. My grandparents bequeathed me the dacha, which I wished to sell. I could almost hear him frowning on the other end of the silence. The home of the family. Lake Milo is the location. I assumed it was utilized by your folks. A little resentful smile appeared on my face. Indeed they are. However, I'm done allowing them to use it as a private holiday destination because the title is in my name. I want it sold fast, but I'm hesitant, definitely considering pushing back. He was aware that my family had attended several of our events while I was still making an effort to maintain appearances. He was aware of the power plays, the nuances, and the dynamics. "All right," he eventually responded, his tone shifting to one that was more concentrated and professional. "I am able to make it happen. This must be done in silence. Should you wish to prevent them from learning about it before it's too late, that's the strategy." Pulling up the rusty metal file cabinet next to my desk, I responded. After searching through the folders and reading through old utility bills and tax reports, I eventually located the original deed. The paper was yellowed and somewhat crumpled, but it still had my grandparents' old chest's subtle, reassuring cedar scent. I signed everything Dan provided me, double-checked documentation, and scanned documents for the remainder of the morning. Before my family could blink, I wanted this finished. In the middle of summer, I see them arriving to the dacha with their SUVs laden with lawn chairs and coolers, only to discover a new family on the porch, courteously waving as they unload their own stuff. Dan texted me in the afternoon. "Did I get everything? My plan is to list it tomorrow. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Gazing at the words on my broken phone screen, I smiled. All set for the repercussions. They were unaware of my plans. I set the phone aside, recline in my groaning chair, and let the joy of this initial step to envelop me. While the money would be a wonderful bonus, it wasn't the main focus of this. This was about causing them to understand they couldn't continue dismissing me as a family joke and upending the basis of their flawlessly constructed universe. I grabbed my pen and wrote down the next thing on my list, the one that would truly rock their intricately intertwined lives. This was only the start. The first crack was selling the dacha, but I wanted to make sure everything fell apart. I had been the silent, unnoticed outsider for far too long, the one they hardly put up with out of a perverted sense of duty to their family. They needed to stop making fun of you. I sat down to work on the joint accounts, the next component of my strategy after sending out the dacha papers. For years, my parents had been exploiting my name carelessly, incorporating me into different financial agreements and utilizing me as a handy additional signature when it was convenient for them. I was still in college when it began. They had claimed that small things like a shared utility bill and a co-signed auto loan were only for convenience. Naturally, they never brought up the fact that some of those accounts were still in existence, but I recalled all of the bank calls I had received over the years. All of the mail that they had inadvertently sent to my small flat. And if my family had taught me anything, it was that their genuine love language was money. In order to acquire a general idea of my parents' financial practices, I spent a solid hour going through old bank records and correspondence. I quickly discovered that my name was still on a few of their joint accounts. Furthermore, I was the owner of several of the accounts connected to the dacha's utilities and property taxes. I needed no more leverage than that. I gave Dan another call. "Hello, it's me." When he picked up, I said, "I want you to do a bit more research. I would like to know which accounts still have my name and request that they be closed. Each and every one." Dan whistled quietly. "You're aiming straight for the target." "Okay. I am able to retrieve the documents. Things might become nasty." "Unclean." "All right," I said, reclining in my chair and tapping my thumb slowly and contentedly on the edge of my desk. "During the next week, just make sure it gets to the source of their pain." I observed the wheels turning. Her financial web started to slowly and methodically come apart as bank alerts started to come in small digital pings. First came our names, a leftover from a long-forgotten automobile purchase, and the joint checking account my mother had discreetly kept open. Without hesitation, Dan closed it and sent the money to my personal account. It was a start, but it wasn't much, perhaps a few $100. Then, without my signature on the account, the dacha's property taxes arrived. My parents sent me a slew of progressively agitated letters after the automated withdrawals failed, which I obediently ignored. My brother sent me a brief text message 2 days later, brimming with the barely concealed superiority he often radiated. "Hey, according to Mom and Dad, some of the accounts aren't functioning. Have you taken any action? Give them a call." I let it read. I imagined them seated at their immaculate dining room table. The meticulously curated family portraits gazed down at them like quiet, critical observers. I pictured my father relaxing in his leather chair, his face tensing as he recognized how much control he had lost, and my mother, her eagerly tapped, well-groomed fingers on her phone. As I typed the following line on my expanding list, "A lawyer about the will." I sat back in my chair and smiled thinly. I was going to complete this battle that they had begun. Once the dacha documentation was signed and the accounts were closed, I sensed the tide turning. I pictured my parents sitting in their spotless living room, my father's jaw tensing with every missed payment notification, and my mother gripping her phone. I was familiar enough with them to picture the situation, my mother's voice rising as they whispered harshly to one another. My father's rage was seething under the surface as he tried to keep everything under control. I wasn't finished yet, though. They wouldn't anticipate the next card I had to play. The will. I had never really thought about it. I assumed that since my brother was the family's golden boy, he would receive the most of whatever they had. However, after the party, the dacha, and the accounts, I saw that I had an opportunity to somewhat level the playing field, maybe even tilt it in my favor. I combed through my emails and located the contact details for Harris, the gray-haired shark of a guy who represented the family's inheritance. He had served as my father's attorney for many years, attending all family gatherings and silently nodding in agreement, while my parents boasted about their wealth and my brother's most recent professional achievements. His well-tailored clothing and slender, approving gaze had always made me feel a little intimidated. He had a strong sense of self-preservation, though, and I knew that he would quickly dismiss a customer to avoid difficulty. The next morning, I gave him a call. On the counter, my coffee is still steaming. The second ring caught his attention. He spoke in a sharp, businesslike tone. What can I do for you, Tom? Outside my window. I watched a couple of pigeons nibbling at crumbs on the fire escape while leaning on the kitchen counter. I want to discuss the family estate and the will. I want to confirm that everything is in its proper place. He paused long enough for me to picture him straightening up taller, his office resonating with the creak of his pricey leather chair. Tom, are you worried about anything in particular? His tone changed slightly as he inquired, as though he was attempting to determine whether this was a normal check or the start of a legal minefield. All I want is for my interests to be safeguarded. I spoke in a quiet, almost bored tone. In case there are any shocks later on, you know. I could just hear the wheels spinning in his mind as he paused. Harris was a professional who enjoyed manipulating family turmoil and dictating stories. However, I sensed the uneasiness slipping into his words. At last, he responded, I would want to arrange a meeting. We may review everything and ensure that you understand your rights. Excellent. With a little contented smile on my face, I answered, let's do it. A weird electric rush went through me as I hung up. I was no longer the family's afterthought, the meek, unnoticed son. I was upending the universe they had so meticulously built. One strategic step at a time. My sister texted me that evening. Mom is going crazy. Why is the call not working? Me. I let it read. As I poured myself a glass, my smile grew. I imagined my family, the close-knit group, desperately attempting to piece together what was going on. Their well-thought-out plans were falling apart more quickly than they could fix them. For years, they had ignored me, writing me off as the family's failure and the black sheep. However, they were now at last starting to comprehend the consequences of cornering and pushing someone too far. The strong, bitter taste of whiskey lingered on my mouth as I relaxed. This was only the start. The fallout didn't take long to start for me. My mother sent me a slew of anxious voicemails 2 days after I spoke with Harris. Every message she sent was strained and a bit more urgent than the last. Her comments were crisp and cut in the first, which was carefully managed. This is your mother, Tom. We must discuss the adoption. Give me a call as soon as you receive this. A few hours later, the second one trembled a little. I'm not sure what you're doing, Tom, but this is getting out of control. You must speak with us before selling the dacha. Please give me a call back. Her poise had totally collapsed by the third message. This is absurd, Tom. You must give me a call. It's not simply your choice. We are related. I gave her a seat. My phone's red notification bubble, expanding every hour. Every call that is ignored feeds the flames. My brother then made an attempt. After 3 calls, he eventually sent a direct irate text. Tom, what on earth are you doing? Everything is being ruined by you. Give Mom a call right now. I read his message once more while leaning back in my chair and sipping my coffee. Seeing the fractures start to appear and knowing that my strategically positioned pressure spots were starting to have effect was satisfying. Dan sent me a brief update later that afternoon about the offer that arrived at the dacha. Strong cash buyer. I'm going forward. I said simply, do it. I could practically feel the mayhem spreading throughout town as the day went on, with my family fighting to recover control of a situation they didn't see they were losing until it was too late. My doorbell sounded late that evening, a loud, irate sound reverberating down the silent corridor as the sun sank below the city skyline and shadows began to creep across my apartment's walls. Half expecting one of my neighbors to protest about the loud music coming from the flat below, I put down my drink and went to the intercom. However, my brother's voice crackled over the little speaker as soon as I hit the button. Let's chat, Tom, so open up. I paused, my fingers lingering over the button as my thoughts whirled through the potential scenarios. However, I had made it this far. Now there was no need in retreating. I left the door slightly open and beckoned him in. I crossed my arms, stood back, and waited while the rusty hinges creaked. My brother entered a little while after. He blushed. The tension rolled off him in waves as his jaw set. He looked about my cramped, messy flat. He wrinkled his nose a little, as though the cluttered bookshelves and mismatched furnishings were an insult to him personally. With a quick click, he shut the door behind him and faced me. Eyes squinted. "Tom, what the devil is going on?" I crossed my arms and leaned back against the wall. My face is composed. "What you imply is unclear to me." He raked a hand over his well-combed hair and laughed harshly and without amusement. "Don't act foolish. The Dasha. For days, the mother of the account has been going mad. She's discussing getting legal counsel." I gave a shrug. "The motions are deliberate and slow. If she so chooses, she can. However, I own the dacha. It has always been." A muscle in his jaw twitched and his face tensed. "Tom, this is for the family. Selling it out from under us is not an option." I looked into his steely eyes. "It's funny. When they utilized it for years without even notifying me, I don't recall anybody seeking my input. Back then, I never heard anyone complain." His hands were balled into fists as he stepped closer. I thought for a second that he may really strike at me, but then he just growled in frustration, pivoted on his heel, and paced the little living room. His gaze moving over the worn-out couch, the warped picture frames on the wall, and the cracked coffee table covered with old magazines. His voice was harsh and deep as he turned back to me. "Tom, what do you want, Cash? Is that it? Just explain the situation to me and perhaps we can resolve it." A lazy, resentful smile appeared on my face. "You still don't understand money isn't the issue here. Respect is at issue, something I've never received from any of you." He started to protest, but I interrupted him. For the first time, I raised my voice. "I was written off by you all a long time ago. Treated me like a failure and a source of shame for the family. However, you overlooked one point." The tension in the room was so intense that he halted, his eyes narrowing. "This family is still a part of me. I'm taking back what's mine for a long, heavy moment," I remarked in a calm voice. The quiet between us stretched like a tension wire that was about to break as we just gazed at one another. He muttered something as he groped for the door handle and eventually turned away. He pulled it open. Without saying another word, he left the door slamming behind him as the old wood creaked in protest. I exhaled softly as the adrenaline began to leave my body. I filled a second glass for myself. A black sheep was what they want. All right, I would show them what it looked like a week after my brother's surprise visit. The actual mayhem started. My phone was buzzing with alerts when I woke up. A few barely comprehensible voicemails, furious messages, and missed calls. It was an indication that the strain I had been building had finally reached a breaking point, and it felt like the digital equivalent of an alarm bell. I checked my messages, wiped my eyes, and rolled out of bed. My sister texted me first. "Mom is going crazy. Give me a call immediately." Then another, after a few minutes. "What did you do?" "Dad is considering cutting you off entirely." "Really? Give me a call." As I made my coffee, I smiled and put my phone down on the kitchen counter. The criticism was to be expected. The last-ditch effort to restore their ideal family image. However, this was occurring more quickly than I had anticipated. While the bitter fragrance of the coffee filled the little kitchen as it spilled into the pot, I checked my email and saw a message from Dan Dacha. "The sale has ended. Money was moved. A good amount of change. When you get a moment, give me a call." With a calm, contented smile on my face, I leaned back against the counter. They were still unaware that it was gone. I picked up my coffee, sipped it slowly, and then pressed play on my mother's most recent voicemail. Through the speaker, her voice crackled. Elevated, tense, a panicked note. It had been years since I last heard from her. "It's gone far enough, Tom. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but this is absurd. We own the Dutch, for the sake of the family. Furthermore, you had no authority to sell it without first consulting us. Give me a call back right away." The voicemail continued to ring in my ears as I hung up. She sounded terrified, truly in a panic. A rift in her typically composed exterior. The door buzzer then sounded as I was ready to take another drink of my coffee. With a sudden, terrified lurch of my heart, I froze the cup halfway to my lips. I put the cup down across the little living room and hit the button for the intercom. "It's Dad, indeed. Let yourself be open." With my palm lingering above the door, I paused. Let go. My father and I hadn't seen each other in months, not since a heated and awkward Thanksgiving dinner during which he spoke about my sister's ideal kids and my brother's most recent business transaction. I did, however, welcome him inside. I had anticipated this encounter. A part of me was practically anticipating it. The door opened a moment later, and my father entered. His eyes were keen. He clenched his jaw. He glanced about my tiny abode in judgment. He looked at the jumbled bookcase, the mismatched furnishings, and the stack of unread mail on the counter. He shut the door after himself. The piercing click reverberated through the quiet. "We need to talk," he remarked in a calm, quiet voice, the voice of a guy accustomed to dominance. I leaned back against the wall with my arms folded. My face is composed. "Okay, speak." His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. "Do you believe you're accomplishing something the Dasha is being sold? Disconnecting from the accounts? Tom, you've made a grave error." I looked him in the eye and didn't flinch. "No, Father. For years, I was treated like I didn't matter, which was a mistake, as if I were only an afterthought. Some people made mistakes that you had to put up with. I'm simply fixing it." A muscle in his face jerked as his jaw clenched. "Isn't money at stake here? Do you wish to get a larger portion of the inheritance?" "That's what it is." I gave a little sour laugh. "You still don't understand money isn't the issue here. Respect is at issue here. About no longer being the family's punching bag." For an extended, uncomfortable time, we simply gazed at one another. There was a heavy and oppressive stillness between us. He broke at last. As if he had finally understood how poorly he had miscalculated, I make contact with his shoulders, causing him to drop slightly and lose the fire in his eyes. "Okay," he answered softly. There was a venom in his voice that I had never heard before. "Your point has been made." My pulse accelerated as I straightened. "No, I am only beginning." Without saying another word, he turned, jerked the door open, and entered a corridor. There was a last harsh clang as the door slammed behind him. His footsteps faded down the hall while I stayed there for a long time looking at the door. A weird, unanticipated calmness descended upon me. A strong, fulfilling sensation of mastery. It has been years since I felt. Returning to the kitchen to finish my coffee, I walked. Once more my phone buzzed. My sister texted me again, and then my brother did the same. The communications have become less demanding and shorter. A little anxious. "Let's have a conversation. We can resolve this." Mom want to express regret. Simply give her a call. With a contented clink, I put the cup down after taking another leisurely drink of my coffee and enjoying its rich, bitter flavor. They had misjudged me, dismissed me. I was dismissed as the bad guy. However, I felt that I had at last established my position within the family on my own terms for the first time in years, and they would have to earn my regard, collaboration, and forgiveness. Story 3. I discovered my card was charged for the whole celebration before to my sister's wedding. She grinned. "Are you a loser without a family to provide for?" "You ought to discuss it." "Then you'll appreciate what follows next," I remarked with a smile. She gave an eye roll. My phone burst with 68 missed calls the next day. My folks were shouting. She begged me to mend it while her new spouse was in a frenzy. I had made a discreet phone call to the location and collected my money. By the end of the day, they owed $15,000, or it was canceled. But then Late one night, as I was half asleep and my phone was buzzing on the nightstand, I became aware of the charge. I tried to interpret the figures by squinting at the screen. $1,500 to $1,000 is gone. My initial assumption was that my card had been compromised. With my heart racing, I hurried to access my banking app and retrieved the transaction data. My sister Amanda had been talking about the Everly, a posh dinner venue, for months, and I assumed that was where the fee was. I felt sick to my stomach. Wide awake, I jumped out of bed to find my little disorganized apartment covered in lengthy shadows from the illumination of my phone screen. I knew in my heart that Amanda had used my card, even though I didn't want to believe it. I made an effort to relax and think clearly. The truth slapped me in the face as I scrolled through my remarks, albeit perhaps this was simply a terrible mistake. Additionally, I discovered minor fees for things like wheat deposits, tastings catering, and even a $500 fee to a wedding store, all in my name. It dawned on me then. When she had forgotten her purse at a family meal a few months prior, I had taken up the tab and she had my card details. I recall handing the waitress my card without hesitation. She must have stored the number or snapped a photo of it. In the dark, I sat there. My jaw tightened to the point of pain. This wasn't only an error. This was intentional, planned. She organized this with the idea that I would just bear the expense, because I was the disposable brother in her perspective, the one who has no wife, no kids, and no true family, nothing more than a living salary. On the next morning, I barged into my parents' home. Amanda was looking through a nice bridal magazine in the kitchen. Like a cocky little beacon, her engagement ring gleams in the early light. My folks were calmly drinking coffee at the table. Small chat was a waste of time for me. My phone's list of charges filled the screen as I held it up. "Did you attend the wedding using my card?" Amanda looked up and gave my phone a fleeting glance before grinning. "I did, of course. You are 26 years old, childless, and single. What else will you buy with your money? Should be glad to assist. No one else is there to help you." My folks just continued to drink their coffee. Not even a blink. It resembled a well-planned ambush. They remained silent despite obviously knowing. My fingers clenched at my sides and I could feel my pulse thumping in my temples. I gazed at them, at the family I had worked so hard to please for years, the same family who now viewed me as a living, talking ATM. I gritted my teeth and smiled. "Then you're actually wondering, what's next?" I muttered as I pivoted on my heel and left. With trembling hands, I made my way back to my flat. Never in my life have I felt so exploited and deceived. However, I refused to let them get away with it. I had had enough of playing the doormat, their contingency plan. I made a call to the dinner hall that evening. I didn't just stop paying. It was reported as unauthorized by me. I took care to make it apparent that my card had been used without my consent. They consented to flag the account and cancel the transaction right away. Then, to further twist the knife a bit, I requested that they reopen the date for reservations. The following morning, my phone blew up. There were 68 missed calls. My parents, Amanda, and her fiancé. I listened to the frantic, irate messages that accumulated while I let them all go to voicemail. Amanda finally texted in desperation around midday. "If you don't fix this, my wedding will be ruined." I simply grinned. She didn't know. And it was only the start. It was obvious that panic had set in by that afternoon. Mark, Amanda's fiancé, arrived at my door first. I took a long, deliberate drink of my coffee, enjoying the moment as I heard the furious hammering against the wood. After letting him knock for a solid minute, I opened the door. Despite the chilly spring weather, he appeared to have just finished a marathon with perspiration streaming down his face. He didn't even try to say hello. "What on earth, Jeremy?" His eyes were wild when he snapped. "Amanda just gave me a tearful call." "What did you do?" I pressed myself against the doorframe and tried not to panic. "I returned my money, Mark. Your fiancé took $15,000 from me, don't you?" He stumbled, obviously unprepared for my sharp retort. "You can't just..." It was a misunderstanding after all. Family supports family. I gave a little sour laugh. It was a miscommunication, thus using my card information to pay for a wedding I wasn't invited to, and taking it without my consent is now only a misunderstanding. His shoulders hunched as he shuffled uneasily. "You're her brother, look, dude. It's her big day. Are you unable to let it go?" I could feel the same bitter rage that I had learnt to swallow over the years rising in my chest. I forced it back, letting my words come out crisp and frigid. "I can't, Mark." Additionally, the venue will be gone at the end of the day if the remaining amount is not paid. Other couples are already being scheduled for the date. His face turned pale, and I almost felt sorry for him. Nearly. However, I recalled Amanda's arrogant grin and how my parents had just sat there taking part in the entire situation. And the sympathy vanished. Mark took a step back and staggered. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish without water. "This will be ruined for her by you." At last he succeeded. His voice wavered. I dropped my voice and leaned forward. "Not at all, Mark. For her own benefit, she damaged this." Hearing him mutter a curse on the other side, I closed the door in his face with a sick sense of satisfaction. However, it didn't end there. Naturally. An hour or so later, my parents arrived hammering on my door as if to intervene. I inhaled deeply, flung it open, and braced myself. First to enter was my mother. As if they had practiced this ambush on the way over, my dad closed in on them both. My dad just looked sad, and my mom's face was twisted with a mix of bewilderment and rage, as like I had failed them by not voluntarily giving up my life for Amanda's day out of a fairy tale. "What the devil is this, Jeremy?" My mother shoved her phone in my face and hissed. It was a screen grab of the Everly email stating that the money had been canceled and that other couples may now use the date. "Your sister's wedding is being ruined by you." Refusing to let her pull me back into that old cycle of responsibility and guilt, I pushed myself to breathe slowly. "No," I answered in a chilly tone. "When she took my money, she wrecked it." With his mouth clenched, my father took a step forward. "You're going overboard. Jeremy, you have no family. You're not wed. You have no children. What else do you spend your money on?" I had an internal sensation. "Hurry up." Unfortunately, the thread of patience is fraying. I met his gaze, my own eyes. "Hard. I spend it on myself, Dad, because it's my money. And if you think I'm just going to let it go, you've seriously misjudged me." Before they could launch into their next round of attacks, I cut them off. "You have until the end of the day to come up with the 15 grand. If you don't, the wedding's off. And that's not my problem." I slammed the door in their faces, my hands shaking as I leaned against it, my heart thundering in my chest. But I knew this wasn't over. By no means. I expected the chaos to peak after that, but I clearly underestimated my family's capacity for entitlement. The next day, I got a text from my cousin Liz, the one relative who actually bothers to stay in touch without asking for anything. She warned me that Amanda had started spinning a wild story about how I was sabotaging her wedding out of jealousy and spite. According to Amanda, I had promised to cover some of the expenses as a gesture of support, and now I was trying to back out at the last minute to ruin her special day. I just shook my head, my anger simmering all over again. I thought about calling her out right then and there, telling the whole family the truth. But I decided to let her dig her own grave a little deeper. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Amanda or my parents. It was my Uncle Robert. Now my aunt and uncle are a different breed. They're the only ones in my family who've ever treated me like an actual adult. Not just a walking bank account. They live a few towns over and don't get involved in the usual family drama, but apparently they had heard about the situation and were driving through my area about 30 minutes later. I heard a knock at my door, and when I opened it, there they were. My uncle with his no-nonsense stare and my aunt with her arms crossed, clearly ready for a fight. But before they could get inside, I saw another car pull up. It was my parents with Amanda and Mark behind them. The whole circus had come to my front door. My uncle gave me a short, knowing look, then stood aside as my folks hurried past him into my living room. Amanda on the edge of tears. Mark followed, appearing as thrilled as a guy on his way to the gallows. Amanda instantly launched into her statement, her voice trembling with contrived emotion. "I can't believe you're doing this to me, Jeremy. I'm your sister. This is my wedding." I held out a hand, cutting her off. "You mean the wedding you attempted to make me pay for without asking? The one you used my card for without my permission?" My aunt snorted, clearly straining to conceal her rage. My uncle, never one for subtlety, merely shook his head. "Is that true, Amanda?" She flinched, her gaze darting between our uncle and myself. Clearly not expecting to be cornered. She started to sputter out a denial, but my uncle cut her short. "If you didn't have the money for a wedding, you shouldn't have planned when you couldn't afford." My folks, who had bracing themselves for another round of moralizing, suddenly looked like they'd eaten a mouthful of sour lemons. My aunt's eyes sharpened as she stepped forward, her tone harsh. "And you too," she replied, jabbing a finger at my parents. "You should feel guilty for allowing this to happen. You have no right to force your kid to pay for a wedding if you cannot afford it." I saw Amanda's carefully crafted facade disintegrate in real time as the color was drained from her face. My parents, for once, didn't lecture me about sacrifice or family responsibilities or make snarky remarks. All they did was stand there squirming uneasily beneath my uncle's fading eyes. With his arms folded, my uncle stared at my parents. "You may count us out if you attempt this again. We will not tolerate you treating Jeremy like a second-class relative." The steady hum of my refrigerator was the only sound to break the strained, unpleasant quiet that descended upon the room. I inhaled deeply, experiencing the burden I was unaware I was carrying. "Start lifting." My uncle turned back to me at last. "Jeremy, get them to go. You know nothing about them." I looked him in the eye as a wave of confidence swept through my chest. I went to Mark and Amanda, my parents. I clenched my jaw. "He was heard by you. Leave now, you everyone." They paused for a second. I didn't recoil as Amanda's eyes began to well up with tears. I just gestured toward the door. They filed out one by one, with my mother giving me a last hurt look over her shoulder, as though I had somehow betrayed her by defending myself. Behind them, the door snapped shut. My aunt inhaled deeply and slowly. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "Jeremy, you made the correct decision. Don't allow them to alter your feelings." My uncle only gave a nod. His eyes were a little softer than I had ever seen them, yet his jaw was firm. I saw their car go off down the street while I stood in the doorway. A peculiar wave of fatigue and relief passed over me, but I knew that this was not the end. Amanda wasn't the kind to give up easily, and I suspected that my parents wouldn't let this go uncontested. However, I felt in control for the first time in years. Amanda wouldn't die peacefully, and I should have known that. My phone began vibrating once more the next morning. It wasn't just her or my parents, though, this time. Some coworkers, mutual friends, and even extended family had become entangled in the mess in some way. It seems that Amanda had shifted strategies and was fully committed to her incorrect role as a bride. In a lengthy, tearful social media post, she portrayed me as the resentful, vengeful brother who was attempting to spoil her wedding out of jealousy. She described how she and Mark had to scramble to save their special day because I had backed out at the last minute after promising to help pay for it. The mail blew up. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years emerged from the shadows to chastise me for being ungrateful and self-centered. Some of my old family friends even suggested that I apologize and make amends after calling me out for leaving my sister in her hour of need. I laughed because it was all so ridiculous. I took a seat back and read through all of the angry remarks. I can't wait to type the actual story. Then I stopped, though. I would let Amanda to play this game if she so desired. I wasn't going to just roll over, but I also didn't intend to defend myself in the court of public opinion. I called my uncle instead. On the second ring, he answered. His strong voice broke through the confusion right away. "I saw the post, Jeremy. Don't stress over it. We're en route." I blinked. "Are you returning?" "Yes." When your aunt read it, she became so enraged that she nearly shattered her phone. "In 2020, we'll be there." After a few minutes, I heard their automobile rumbling up outside, but before they could reach my door, I heard the scream of tires on the street. My stomach turned as I peered through the glass. My parents were there once more, closely followed by Amanda and Mark. With my pulse racing, I answered the door as my aunt and uncle arrived at my porch. Amanda and my parents rushed up the stairs. A new surge of wrath twisted their features. Without even waiting for an invitation, Amanda took action. She poked her finger in my face and shoved past my uncle. "You have no right to turn Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert against me. This family is being torn apart by you." My mother came forward before I could even respond. Her voice was harsh and piercing. "You need to take care of this immediately, Jeremy. Your sister feels ashamed. Are you aware of your actions?" My uncle sprang in between us before I could even think of a response, his wide shoulders almost filling the doorway. He glanced at Amanda below. His expression hardened like stone. "Enough. Jeremy has been pulled through by you. Put an end to your foolishness." Amanda shrank back. Her jaw was agape. She turned to my parents for help, but before they could say anything, my aunt interrupted them. "Your voice has been heard. It's our turn now." With my uncle right behind her, she entered my living room and signaled for me to shut the door. As a precaution, I locked it. As though they had just entered a courtroom and discovered they were the ones on trial, my parents and Amanda stood still in the foyer. My uncle's jaw tightened as he turned to face them. "For years, you have been utilizing Jeremy. Because he doesn't fit into your idealized little family story, you treat him like a fallback option. That's over now, though." My mom started to object, but my aunt cut her off with a stern glance. "You attempted to use guilt to get him to pay for a wedding that he didn't want to. You're attempting to publicly humiliate him for safeguarding his own money after you used his card without permission. Do you even hear what you're saying?" There was a thick, oppressive quiet in the room. With her fingers twitching as though she wanted to slap someone but couldn't determine who deserved it more, Amanda's face had turned from furious red to ghostly white. My dad, who normally has the loudest voice during arguments, simply stood there with his eyes locked on the ground and his mouth clenched. He had nothing to say for once. At last, my uncle moved forward. His voice was deep and menacing. "It's fortunate that Jeremy did not accuse you of stealing. You won't simply lose your wedding if you continue like this. A lot more will be lost by you." My uncle then turned and made his way to the door. My head was just behind his. Before they departed for a considerable amount of time, she paused long enough to glance at me over her shoulder and gave me a slight gesture of encouragement. Nobody spoke. Then my dad and Amanda left my apartment without saying anything further. Their footsteps were dejected and heavy. With a deep, nervous breath, I leaned back against the door as it snapped shut. They weren't finished, I knew. My parents were too obstinate to acknowledge their mistakes, and Amanda was too proud to overlook this. But I felt like I had true allies on my side for the first time in a long time, and I was prepared for whatever happened next. I hoped that Amanda and my parents would finally back off after that last confrontation. However, I ought to have known better. My mailbox was full of pink envelopes when I got home from work 2 days later. Wedding invites. My mouth fell as I ripped one open. Amanda sent it. She had not only doubled down, but had made the decision to proceed with the wedding. "A family celebration made possible by the generosity and love of our families," was written on the invitation. My blood pressure increased. She continued to tell the same falsehood that I had promised to assist with her wedding expenses before attempting to back out. I attempted to relax after tossing the invitation onto my kitchen counter. Her courage astounded me. She continued to try to rewrite the tale to fit her own narrative, portraying me as the bad guy, despite all that had transpired. Reminding myself that I had already shut off the money, I inhaled deeply. They would have to pay the entire $15,000 themselves if they didn't have my card. But then a more sinister idea began to creep into my head. What if they had managed to go beyond it? What if they had been able to use a banquet hall to restart the payment line, or worse, get my parents to pay for it themselves and hold me responsible if it doesn't work out? Reaching for my phone, I called the dinner hall. My heart is racing. After a few rings, the manager answered, and I tried to seem composed. "Hello, I'm Jeremy. For the impending wedding, I just wanted to make sure that my card is still banned." The manager paused for a while. "Yes, Mr. Matthews, I see. A few days ago, your sister called us to attempt to resolve this, but we told her that we couldn't do anything without your permission. It wasn't warmly received by her." I breathed out slowly in relief. One thing I didn't have to worry about, at least. My phone buzzed again nearly instantly after I hung up, feeling a bit better. Uncle Jeremy was there. Our invitation arrived just now. His voice was harsh as he spoke. "What the devil is this bullshit about the wedding being made possible by family support?" My voice was tight and sour as I laughed. "Amanda is here. She continues to attempt to act like the victim." I could just picture him massaging his temples on the other end of the telephone as he let out a sigh. "All right, we'll take care of it. But listen, one of your relatives just told me. Amanda is attempting to eke out the last funds. Out of spite, she has been attacking every member of the family and making up a tale about how you are destroying her special day." I squeezed the bridge of my nose and closed my eyes. She was, of course. She most likely hoped to shame enough people into giving her a last-minute bailout. "Uncle Robert, thanks for the caution," I said. "Thank you." He paused for a second. "Simply remain vigilant. She is quite desperate. Individuals make foolish decisions." I ended the call. My thoughts are racing. I knew that Amanda would not let up until she had extracted as much money and sympathy as possible from the family. I hurriedly scribbled a message on my laptop and emailed it to every one of my relatives, including my cousins and my distant aunts and uncles. I explained everything in a brief and straightforward manner, including how Amanda had used my card without my consent, how she and my parents had attempted to coerce me into paying for her wedding, and how I had eventually stood my ground. With my heart still pounding, I pressed send and relaxed. I was done allowing Amanda to steer the conversation, even though I knew it would cause controversy. If she want conflict, I was prepared to confront her directly. And I genuinely felt like I could get out of this whole situation for the first time in weeks. I should have anticipated Amanda's frantic final move. My flat door was slightly open when I returned home 2 days after sending the email to the family. I walked in feeling nauseous. I can feel my heart thumping in my ears. It was a complete disaster. The pillows on my couch had been thrown out. Drawers are left open. The floor was littered with papers. The scene appeared to be taken from a lousy crime show. Some devices, including my laptop, were gone. I also looked inside my safe in my bedroom. The one that had my backup card, passport, and emergency cash had been forced open. A surge of icy anger swept over me. I was aware of its perpetrator. Amanda had gone too far. I called 911. I attempted to speak steadily, although my hands trembled. After the operator collected my information, 2 cops arrived at my door in 15 minutes to take photographs and dust for fingerprints. My phone buzzed once more as I was watching them work. Uncle Jeremy had left me a message. "One of your relatives just contacted me. Amanda has been frantically telling people that you are mentally unwell and that you owe her money. Her goal is to make the entire family turn against you." I tightened my jaw. My blood is boiling. She wasn't only attempting to undermine my financial security, though. She was attempting to ruin my image. One of them looked to me with a solemn attitude after the office was over. "Do you know who could have committed this? Is there anyone who wants to harm you?" I forced the words through the knot in my throat and nodded. "Indeed, my sister. She is in a difficult situation." With steely eyes, the officer made a notation in his notepad. "We require her details. If we are able to connect her to this, we'll file charges." When they were gone, I lay down on my ripped couch with my head spinning. My entire existence seemed to have been completely upended. And the individuals with the knife were the ones who were meant to be supporting me. However, I received a call from Uncle Jeremy later that evening. "It's done," he responded firmly. I spoke with your folks for a long time. They are paying for the damages and are aware of what Amanda did. Both a scandal and the possibility of the police being involved are things they want to avoid. I exhaled deeply, feeling a slight release of tightness in my shoulders. Uncle Robert, thank you. Without you, I'm not sure what I'd do. He paused. He lowered his voice. Boy, just look after yourself. This is not fair to you. I had an odd mix of relief and fatigue as I hung up. My parents had made the decision to ignore Amanda's mess. However, they were at least paying for it this time. Amanda eventually got married. However, there was a cost. She had left a path of bitterness in her wake, ruined every connection, and torched every bridge. I had finally created a limit that my parents couldn't cross, and they had to spend tens of thousands of dollars cleaning up her mess. And I felt free, maybe for the first time in years.